So we've just started the recording. We've had a little bit of a check-in, and just a reminder that if you'd like me to pause the recording at any point so that you can say something off record, feel free. So I'm Jana. Also, other pronunciations are very welcome. I love the variety, especially when other languages get involved with my name. Wonderful. And yeah, I did 5 years of psychology and stopped short of becoming a psychologist because I realized that I didn't want the job that seemed to me to be the job at the time, and much later came into education and ended up really focusing on the philosophy of education because of looking at self-directed education, but have increasingly also been bringing that psychology experience back together with the philosophy. My dad was a psychologist and also helped co-found Riverstone Village. He's not with us anymore, but we also did quite a bit of work together during those years, having a look at all of this. So, I just try and bring all of that experience to the space, including my parenting experience, experience with, very divergent family members. And I'm here. And I'm really, really delighted to hear who else is here today. We've got a lovely spread. Some of you are parents, some of you are helping professionals. And we also seem to have quite a spread in terms of the level of current understanding of PDA and current understanding of SDE. There's obviously a limit to what we're going to manage in one call. But, let's see if we can do something useful with it. This is an interactive space. I don't over-plan these sessions because I want them to be able to be responsive to the needs of the people who hear. But I'm just going to start by putting up a little bit of a whiteboard, maybe. And I just want to see here. The whiteboard's loading. Or maybe we can, I should have made another poll. How many of you have heard about spoons or know about spoon theory? Is there anybody who doesn't know anything at all about spoon theory? Maybe I should, in fact, maybe I'll just quickly switch off the whiteboard. Sorry. Maybe I'll just quickly talk a little bit about spoon theory. So spoon theory came from somebody not neurodivergent, but who had an autoimmune problem. And she was trying to explain to her friend, and they were sitting in a restaurant. And she was trying to explain to her friend, what was it like to live with this autoimmune problem? Because she just couldn't cope. She couldn't do the same things as her friend could do. So she gathered up all the spoons from all the tables around her. And she said, so I've got, now I'm paraphrasing seriously, right? But to give you the basic idea. I've got so many spoons in the middle of in the start of the morning, like maybe 10 spoons. But it costs me one just to open my eyes because I'm not sure if I'm ready to wake up. And then it costs me another one to get out of bed. And then it costs me another one to shower. And it costs me another one to get dressed. And, by the time she gets to the restaurant, she's sort of on her last 2 spoons. So if it's going to be noisy or the food's going to take too long to come, she's going to have to go home, right? So that's the idea behind spoon theory, that some people's spoons go a lot faster than others. For example, her friend would wake up with 10 spoons, and by the time she gets to the restaurant, she still has 9, because for her, it only cost her 1 spoon to do all of the above. So that's just the first thing to always have in mind when we're looking at something like PDA, that firstly, what takes away your spoons? And secondly, how easily do they go? So for PDA, we've got a situation where those spoons go for all of the most usual reasons as well, in terms of things like sensory overloads, or things that are, emotionally or practically challenging or physically tiring. But there's an extra thing that takes away the spoons for PDA, and that is demands in and of themselves. So for somebody who's got no trace of demand, aversion, or avoidance, we could have a situation where I wanted to do something, like maybe I wanted to eat this piece of chocolate cake. And if you tell me you have to eat that chocolate cake right now because I say so, and if you don't, there will be these consequences, I will still say, well, that suits me fine. I'm happy to eat my chocolate cake, right? There's no problem there at all if we don't have any trace of a demand aversion or a demand avoidance. Whereas what makes PDA have that extra P, which in the conventional idea is pathological demand avoidance, so it's actually doing harm to the person who has this profile, is that even if I really, really wanted to eat that chocolate cake, the fact that there's now a whole lot of demand placed on it could even prevent me from being able to do it when I wanted to, because I've just lost the spoons to be able to cope with that level of demand. So that's your super quick and dirty overview. So, for example, one of my first distinctions that I had to see, which was very, very useful, is I was up close and personal with somebody with a very, very high level of ordinary demand avoidance, who really didn't like being told what to do, didn't like being out of control, and really had a very high need for autonomy, but didn't have PDA. So, for example, there, you can simply problem solve around the actual other issues. You know, does the soap smell okay? Have we given you enough transition time? Have I given you a say? Does it feel fair to you? All of those things that could prevent being able to accomplish something could be kind of rationally taken one by one until the problem was solved. Then when I first encountered a PDA that I'll just give you a lovely example. We went to a ballet and they really, really wanted to go to the ballet and they really, really enjoyed it. And we went the next time and we went the next time. And then the next time they didn't want to go, but I knew they were still completely into the ballet. And I said, well, why don't you want to go? And they said, because when the bell rings, we have to go to our seat. And I was like, well, that makes no sense at all. When the bell rings, we have to go to our seat. It must be because the last ballet we saw was Romeo and Juliet with sword fighting, and maybe that was a bit scary. They were like, no, when the bell rings, you have to go to your seat. That's why I don't want to go to the ballet. Because all of the spoons would get used up on, we've got to go, we're going to be late, what are you going to wear? Now there's traffic. And by the time they got to the ballet, there was just this one spoon left. And then the demand that now you have to go to your seat made it that they could tell they just weren't actually going to cope. So that's your quick and dirty overview of PDA. At this point, I'm going to pause. Do we have any questions to clarify that very simplistic, quick and dirty overview before we go on to a similar explanation of SDE? I'm going to also just check the chat. Lovely. So we've got some great shorts being shared in the chat. And yes, there's often an intersection between being neurodivergent and dealing with chronic illnesses. Unfortunately, we tend to be sensitive to a lot of stuff, right? Which can take us out. Tracy, yeah.
So sorry, I was trying to give you a thumbs up to say no, but gave you the wrong one.
No worries. Okay. So if that's our overview of PDA, let me just think. Do we want to go straight to an overview of SDE? Or do we want to have a look? Let's first go to that whiteboard and let's have a quick look at what happens with PDA in an educational space then, right? So if you're able to edit the whiteboard, feel free to just type on it. Any demands that you think then would be, you know, an extra spoon loss when it comes to education specifically, and just pop them up on the board. If you're not able to edit the whiteboard, I'll take dictation, or you can pop it in the chat and we'll paste it across. But let's just brainstorm a few things onto the board. Why would PDA have a particularly difficult time with the way that education tends to get done in our current mainstream reality. And I'll just put a few up as well. Like I say, feel free to shout them out. Don't even have to raise your hand. You can just unmute and say, and I'll write it down.
Getting up, getting dressed, getting out the house in time.
Yeah.
Having to greet people, having to sit in your class, having to ask permission to drink water, dealing with the noise. I'll stop. There's so many.
Yeah. Like you said, there's so many. Yeah. Gotcha. Early morning school is all about demands, just in its nature. Yes.
Wearing a school uniform as well. It can be a huge one because of the sensory element.
Okay.
And then needing to do the work, needing to sit and work out what fractions are, and finding yourself confused and bewildered, and other people seem to know what's going on, and you're too self-conscious to ask a question. So then you avoid school, and then you need to avoid school even more, and it gets harder and harder to go back.
Yeah. Right. Anybody else want to add anything?
Demands aren't just external, they're internal, one's own sense of, am I getting it right? Am I getting it wrong? Does this person like me? What's required of me here? Am I okay? Am I not okay?
Yeah. Yes.
I've been putting things in the chat because I still can't edit it somehow.
I'll go grab them.
But I think one of the ones that hasn't been mentioned is the authoritarian interactions between the teacher and the students.
Yeah. Yeah, not being able to go home when you want to. Being bullied.
Yeah,
Not
Jana,
being able to go to the restroom.
pediatrician drew for me recently that in the brain, PDA would look like a little block between the neocortex, which is the communication center of our brain, and the emotional regulation center of our brain, the amygdala. They said, imagine a little block there. So it's when you're in a high stress environment, high social, sensory, academic demand, that you actually, the pragmatics of language, the ability to express how you feel, what you need, what's happening, to process information, all of that goes. So the PDA also has that inability to join communication and emotion in that moment.
You go into a shutdown, into a sort of a fight, flight, freeze. And I mean, there's a lot more F's, fawning and there's a lot of F's that you can go into where you don't really have much power over yourself anymore, much control over yourself anymore. You don't have volition. You don't have the capacity to action things according to your choices. So yeah. All right. So I'd like to reframe it again slightly, and I'm just going to see if I can grab a picture here in terms of looking at how those different demands all cluster. I just want to maybe share this quickly. So somebody, let me just also just check that I've got It's too loud, too many people at the school. Oh, and this is a nice one. If they don't like a teacher or perceive what a teacher is thinking or feeling, then they can also self-sabotage. Yeah. And also the tone of the teacher, the transitioning between subjects, body language of people in authority, it's the big one. So we've got lots and lots and lots, and let's cluster them a little bit. Let's go here. So let's just see all these different demands as different hands pointing. It's like, you have to do this, you have to deal with that, you have to cope with the other, you have to achieve this, you have to manage. But they also have kind of strata. So that yellow bubble would maybe be those internal demands. It's like, I want to do it. I wish I could do it. I wonder if I'm good enough. I have to be perfectionistic. I have to manage it perfectly. Sound familiar? Right? So there's all that internal demand. I want to keep up with the other kids. I want to be good enough. All of that. And then you've got the next layer of demand, which would be that orange layer, which would be all of the peers. I want them to like me. I want to get on with them. I want to be friends with them. I want to fit in. I want to be good enough on the friendship level. I also have to cope with kids, for example, trying to be friends with me, that they're not doing it in a way that works for me. I've got to deal with all of them. And then I've got the school itself maybe in the red, which would be your curriculum and your tests, and you're having to listen to the teacher, and the uniforms, and the not being able to go to the bathroom, and all of that school there. And then I've got my parents maybe on the purple. There's my parents' expectations. I want them to be proud of me, and they also told me that I have to, and whatever that might involve. And then you've got the world itself, which is, if I don't learn to read, I'll sleep under a bridge, So you've got all of these different shells or layers of demand all crunching in. And there's just so many of them that it's really not at all surprising how many kids go into shutdown or collapse. For many, many kids, it's really just a question of time. Unless they find some way to hack some of that, it can just be very, very unsustainable to have to deal with all of that and learn, right? Because we haven't even dealt with the learning here. This is just all the learning to cope with levels of demand. So much energy is going into coping with all these layers of demand. It's taking all of the spoons, right? And then we also get this interpretation, which I find very interesting, where they say that PDAs learn in fits and starts, like they'll master something and then seem to backslide. And then, whereas also what I've seen is that the fact that you've mastered something now becomes a demand to perform at that level. So, it might not actually always be a learning loss sometimes. Sometimes it can just be, now I don't have the spoons to perform at that level because of the demand to perform at that level. So I'm no longer able to focus. I don't have the spoons to focus on doing the thing because there's now the demand that people also expect that I'm able to do the thing, which is just the straw that breaks the camel's back. So it's not necessarily always a learning loss. I've got here a nice comment in the chat. Reminds me of when my PDA pretended not to know her letters at the eye exam. Yeah, exactly. Because it's a demand, right? So when we look at this picture, how useful would it be if we could at least drop just a couple of these layers? So let's just go back to that little picture again. Just get it up. Not the whiteboard, the screen share. There we go. All right. And what if we could just take away one layer? Let's say that was perhaps my parent being really, really worried about my education, because that's huge. Because parents who don't understand SDE are going to be really, really worried about their PDA falling behind, right? Am I right or am I right? I've seen this so many times. Those parents are panicking. It's like, but my kid's been on school refusal for 2 years. How are they ever going to catch up? How are we ever going to get this child through the system? They can't manage to do homework. There's too many demands around maths, and that parent is panicking, panicking, panicking. As much as that parent might be trying to accommodate and put on an air of calm, we know how good PDAs are at picking up when we are, pretending, okay? Because there's that hyper alertness that comes with that anxiety state. That hyper alertness is very, very good at picking up when our calm is not real. So the more that parent is panicking, that's a big crush, right? What if we could just take that away? What if we could just bring the peace of mind to the parent that everything will be okay, and that the parent actually gets in their body? Oh, this can actually be okay. There is actually hope. This is all right. What if we could just achieve just that? It would take away a big crunching layer of demand. And what if we could take away one more? Whatever it might be. What if we just take out two? So we could maybe take out the curriculum, or take out, the schoolishness with its whole big cluster. There's some of them we'll never be able to take away. But if we can just take out a few, then we might be able to get a shift in feeling and experience of those demands, that they're still there, but there may be something I can start becoming aware of and learning how to deal with demands, instead of just being so crushed by the demands that I'm not learning about anything. What if I start actually being able to contemplate, because they've been reduced enough that I can focus on them and start learning how to work with them and around them? And then instead of kind of just being in this collapse, if I can, this picture for me is very much about the child who's, we heard a description a little bit in the check-in. The child who has collapsed, has escaped from the system as a result of the collapse, has managed to reduce the demand level because of escaping from the system, because of being in collapse, but is now in collapse. And then can actually start recovering because the demands are fewer. And then the light can maybe even start breaking through. And if we can sustain that lower demand environment, then those demands can become light enough that there's actually starting to be a light at the end of the tunnel, and a sense of hope for that child, inside that child. Because if all I've got left, this is the aim of SDE, is if all I've got left is two sources of demand, and I'll tell you what those two sources of demand are. What we want in SDE is we want to get down to, can anybody guess what two sources of demand are going to remain if we get everything else out the way? I'd love to hear it. Which two are going to always be there?
I'm going to guess internal and the world one.
Exactly. You see, we've got an experienced SDE PDA parent here, right? Those are the two that will always remain. The internal demand from the PDA, I want to be good enough. I want to achieve. I want to feel competent. I want to be capable. And the world telling you what that looks like. So the world is going to tell you, you will not be okay if you can't figure out your own change and know whether you've been cheated. At this point in our reality still, you will not be okay if you can't read. So those two levels of demand are always going to be there. And from an SDE perspective, that's perfect, because those are our drivers in SDE. Those are the drivers that get kids to actually self-educate or use the resources around them to support their education. It's the desire, the drive, the curiosity. It's all of those internal forces in connection with the world that's giving you the real world feedback. So if we can use all of those other layers as much as possible to support just that, I'm going to just pop a whiteboard up and get another page. Good, let's just open the board and go to a different page on the board. Come on board. Thank you. Let's have another page. There we go. So on the one hand, we've got spoons, and spoons get lost and we want to conserve them. So we want to try and conserve the spoons by reducing demands. Because if the child is not feeling overwhelmed, then they've got energy to spend actually learning something. So we had a question in the survey when people were signing up, which was about reading. I'm just going to pause that whiteboard for a moment to talk about that. So the question was, I can't remember the age, but they were like 9.5 or something like that. And it was taking forever to learn to read, and it was happening in fits and starts, and there would be months breaks in between. I've seen that directly. And in fact, I wrote about that for my assessment for Laura and Harry. So I'll share that together with this recording, what I wrote. Because, oh, I'm still on the same whiteboard for you? Okay, well, we'll have a look at it in a minute.
You
I'm
have
not
to
quite
switch
sure.
it manually yourself. Each
Oh dear.
person has to switch it. It's at the
Oh,
bottom right corner.
thank
So
you,
you can
Sylvie.
switch from one page to the other manually on your own
Okay.
screen when the whiteboard
Sorry,
is up.
Sandra.
Yeah, you see, unfortunately, Zoom has made their whiteboard more fancy very, very recently. And it's really annoying me because I've mastered the old one and I'm not that tech agile myself. I rely on the teenagers. So where was I? Oh, reading, yes. So I've seen that pattern. I'll share what I wrote, because it's that balance of that internal and external demand. So the external demand is constant. It says you have to learn to read. Then you try and take away all of the things that are depleting the spoons so that there's enough spoons left for the child to be able to engage with that demand. You have to learn to read. And now it kind of has to be a delicate balance. If you know how to drive, it's kind of like managing your accelerator and your brake and your clutch and all of that. It's this balance where you've got to just get it right, which is that the moment there's progress, then there's also a demand, because I've made progress and I'm expected to be able to manage that. And I've read for I've done reading practice for 5 days in a row, and now I'm expected to do day 6, and I can't, so now I have to stop, right? So if the parent knows that there's no rush to read, because the conventional message is that the child has to be reading by 6, otherwise they're going to fall behind and there's going to be a problem. And for every year that that child's not yet fluently reading, they're going to fall further and further behind, and it's going to be harder and harder and harder and harder for them to catch up. That's where that parental anxiety comes in. Whereas once you've read the SDE case studies and you find out how many kids only learn to read at 9.5, 10.5, 11, 12, 13, 14, and by 18, you can't tell when they learned to read because they've caught up completely. So, for example, my first child learned to read at about 9.5 and was reading Harry Potter, the full thick ones, before, the year was even out, from 0 to there. Multiple grades of reading with comprehension level, boom, leap. My second child, 10.5, made a similar leap. So I'm thinking the oldest that I've seen personally in my space is about 12. But there are kids in SDE spaces who've gone older than that. And it's incredibly anxiety making, or it makes parents very, very anxious until their children learn to read, because it's sort of the holy grail of basic education is literacy. And until that moment when the child is literate, there's this terror that it won't happen, or it won't happen sufficiently. And ironically, with PDA, it's exactly that anxiety that's likely to delay it the most. There doesn't even have to be dyslexia present. Sometimes there also is, because it often co-occurs. But even then, again, the SDE experience, if you have a look at the literature, is that as long as you've got the mechanics in place, so you don't actually have brain injury, in your neurology in terms of your capacity to read. If you've got the capacity to read, even if you've got dyslexia, you've got the glasses, so you've got that piece of hardware in place. After that, the most important thing is to allow the environment to give you the incentive. So you make sure that there's awareness of reading, and there's resources, and there's people who can answer questions, and there's support. And then there's a relaxed attitude. There's a knowing, solid knowing that it will happen when it's ready. It will happen. It's okay. It's inevitable. Don't worry about this. We can rather worry about things like mental health, because that's not a guarantee, right? Self-esteem is not guaranteed to happen. Being able to master one's own anxiety is not guaranteed to be able to happen. Reading's easy. So this is where I'm going to pop back to my whiteboard. I know what I'm saying might sound crazy and too good to be true. But here's the thing. What builds spoons is also what drives education and what drives human thriving. I call it cards. Cards build spoons. Drive education. And support human thriving. Now, some people are going to know what I mean by cards. Anybody?
I do, but that's too easy for me. I'm going to shut up.
Yeah, it's too easy. You've been through my course now. Okay, so the human core needs common to every single person in the world is competence, autonomy, relatedness. Those are researched by DC and Ryan, if you've ever heard about autonomous motivation and controlled motivation. That's them and their team of hundreds of psychologists all around the world who've been researching for decades. They've found these three to be absolutely universal, cross-cultural, these core needs. I think that we also have to include dignity, dignity and safety, which is where I get my cards, right? So when we reduce demands, we increase safety and we increase autonomy. And by increasing safety and autonomy, we also find that because we are the ones increasing the safety and the autonomy, the relatedness also gets increased, because the relationship between us and the person that we're supporting also improves, because we're no longer a source of demand. We're now a source of, I'm chill. I know you're going to learn to read. I'm not worried about it. It's like whenever, whatever, and I'm radiating that. So that's building your safety. It's also building your connectedness with me. Now, without that pressure, you also have an increase in dignity, because I don't feel not good enough and stupid and ashamed anymore, because, hey, I've seen you've shared with me all these stories about all these kids who learn to read really late and how they're doing fine now, and that it's not a problem and it's not only me. So my dignity is feeling better. And then that's also going to increase my feeling of competence, because I was feeling like, oh my gosh, what is wrong with me? I'm 10 and I can't read. Whereas, oh, actually some really, really clever people, some brilliant people couldn't read when they were 10. So I can rather focus on what I can do rather than what I can't do. So I can relax a little bit about learning to read, because I can focus on my painting, which I'm good at. And I can spend more time painting, because people aren't shoving me at this direction of, you can't paint, you have to you have to work on your reading, because this is an emergency, so you haven't got time to paint. No, I can paint. And I can build my feeling of competence around my painting, which builds my spoons, which enables me now to tackle the difficult challenge of facing the emotionally charged topic of reading. So if I can spend most of my day painting, maybe I can do 5 minutes of reading tonight. And it's probably going to be at 10:30 when everybody else wants me to be asleep. Please be ready for that with PDA. It's a very common pattern, not universal, obviously. Everyone's unique, but it's a very common pattern. So when these core needs are met for any human being, you're going to have a state that is leaning more towards thriving. And to the extent that these core needs are not being sufficiently met, you're going to have a person struggling no matter what their neurotype. If we take an absolutely neurotypical, very robust person, and we sabotage the meeting of all of these needs, that person's not going to cope well, not going to learn well, not going to be thriving. So with self-directed education, we go backwards. So conventional education aims to try and get the child to learn stuff. And then now that we're focusing on getting the child to learn stuff, we want to try and add some mental health stuff on top, where we kind of also try to make them feel a bit competent and have good relationships. But that's secondary. Self-directed education works exactly the other way around. We start by focusing on meeting those core needs so that we have a strong, thriving person, because after that, things tend to happen fairly naturally. Because, especially with PDA, there is that drive for mastery, that drive for competence, that desire to do things well. And when there's enough spoons, then all it really needs is that reality check coming in from the outside as to what it is important for you to use that drive to learn. So I'm going to pause there. I'm going to take some stuff from the chat, and then let's go for some questions to see if I'm making any sense to anybody yet. Okay, so the core needs are the cards. So cards is competence, autonomy, relatedness, dignity, and safety. That's CARDS. Just a nice way to remember for your checklist, that you can actually go through this as a little checklist and say, in my child's life, how much do they have a subjective sense of competence? And let's just note, it's a subjective sense of competence. It doesn't matter how they really match up to the world, it matters how they feel about it, which is where it's also really important not to give unsolicited feedback or contradict a subjective sense of competence, because it builds the spoons that are needed to actually get like real objective competence. So competence, autonomy, that feeling of support and co-regulation, very, very important for PDA, that there's alone space when it's required, but that there's another body there co-regulating. Sometimes an animal can be hugely helpful. Otherwise, a trusted person, a companion that's being chosen autonomously in that moment, just having that body next to you, doing even their own thing, can make an enormous difference to the feeling of safety and relatedness. And then just the dignity of sometimes just having an awareness of the fact that it's PDA, what PDA is, and being able to self-advocate is also just hugely helpful for building that sense of dignity and sense of competence, safety, and all of the rest. I'm going to stop sharing now so that we can go into a little bit more interaction. And just checking the chats. Okay. My PDA would meet the criteria for dyslexia if she went to school and she learned to read organically, never any reading lessons involved. And then here's another one. Okay, many GP doctors don't understand. And I was told that I was failing my child because at her 7-year appointment, she was reading less than at the previous assessment. Yeah, taking into account the demand of the doctor. It makes sense that that would happen. I was strongly encouraged to hire specialist teachers to help her. And this is the irony with PDA, is that the specialist teachers, it's so difficult to be a specialist teacher with any child if it's non-consensual. So this is also where I've worked before with a couple of people in my courses around reading instruction and specialized support for dyslexia, that it works very well when it's with the child's idea and the child's request and the child's ready and the child's in control of it. But it can be counterproductive when it's imposed and the child feels that they are being fixed and having to be fixed, and it can amplify their, especially for PDA, amplify their anxiety that there's something wrong with them, that they need to have this specialized help. It's not always effective because of that counter pressure that's coming along with the concrete assistance, the level of emotional atrophy that's happening in those lessons can be difficult. Okay, so let's have some questions and discussions. And is this making sense? Okay, so we've got one person finding this helpful. Sorry, I'm just going to cough some more. And everybody else, where are you at? Do you think I'm nuts? Another vote for it's helpful. I'm often not sure how much autonomy, because too much also creates lack of safety. Ah, okay. Yes. So this is an important thing to just touch on. I sometimes say it's not about being in control, it's about being in control of the level of control. So there can even become a demand that you be in charge, you choose, which does backfire. So it's quite important. This is again where the SDE facilitator learns to be responsive to the request from the child, spoken or unspoken, on a kind of a consent base. So there's times when you will do for the child, especially with PDA, because they need you to. They need you to do A, B, and C so that they can do D. So in terms of that, it's a delicate negotiation around how much they want to make the decision, make the choice, or be in charge, or how much they want to delegate that to you. But they're still in charge of delegating that. Does that make sense in terms of that? Yeah, conversations. Sorry, go say it yourself. I was going to read it, but rather.
Oh, yeah, I was saying in the chat that that's where conversations about what they consent to and what they need as support are really helpful, because and it's, I wanted to add that it's very fluid. It's going to change a lot over time, because also the idea of having a routine and doing the same thing are very triggering and difficult for PDAers.
Yeah.
So there are times in my family where they need me to make the choice of what they're going to eat for lunch, and then decide that and bring it to them and end of story. And there are times where that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
So, so I just wanted to add that it changes over time too. And Anissa is messaging me directly. I think there's a way for you to message the whole group instead.
Yeah, if you just look at that little blue bar directly above your message, you can click on that to choose if you want to send to the meeting group chat or to a particular member. But yeah, this is also very important if you don't know that much about PDA, is to know that the moment that you think you've got it down and something's working and you've got a plan, expect it to change. And this is also one of the tricky things about being a helping professional, is that if you're going to insist for your families that they come at a regular slot at the same time every week, you're probably not going to find it's very sustainable. Whereas if you're able to be more flexible and especially put the child in charge of whether they attend or not, that can actually lead to it being more consistent, ironically. All right, now let's have a look here. All right. So I'm just scrolling up. We've got quite a lot to get there all at once. Okay. So high level of control and a vicious cycle of giving autonomy resulting in control of us as parents, or else loud shrieking is occurring, and this is a verbal individual. Okay. So that sounds to me like you possibly at the earlier stages of learning how to accommodate. So there's not yet a high sense of safety and a strong sense of safe relationship. If there's sort of an attempt to control the parents and then a meltdown. So yeah, this is just hang in there. and maybe you want to get some more support, so that, you know, as you get more used to accommodating and as you become more confident in how to interact, this is going to shift. Okay, my biggest challenge at the moment is screen time. Yeah, every waking moment she's on. It seems to be the only thing she can manage, but we're looking at doing either a GED or an IEP. Learning will take spoons. What's a fair amount of screen time per day? Okay. Is there a list of SDE facilitators for Durban? No, there isn't. A list of, but you can become one. And I'm just trying to think, there is a fantastic student of mine from one of my courses, but she's in mainstream education right now and wanting to get out again. Maybe I can connect you.
Can I share my experience of screen time and limits and not limiting it? It's really scary as a parent, but I let go of all efforts to control and limit screen time. And I still go through periods of doubting and thinking, what am I doing? Like, how can this be how my child is living? And I resist, I bite my tongue, I resist all the urges. And within a day or two, she's more interactive again. It's like she's been chewing over something in her mind. She's been preoccupied with something. She'll emerge, she'll draw. So, and she's learning stuff that I wouldn't have expected her to be picking up, just, you know, along the way on her screen.
Yes. Yeah. So we've got other comments in the chat also saying that it's helped my child feel regulated, and sometimes it's the only way to recharge. I do a whole unit on screen time. It's not easy for parents to get their heads around it, and you also need to look at the research in detail. But specifically for PDA, I find screen time is one of those questions with PDA where the way I'd express it is the parent needs to let go of the illusion that you have the ability to limit screen time with PDA. I don't get the sense that you have the capacity to limit screen time for PDA, in that if you take the screen time away from the top, the result of that takes away so many spoons and creates so much stress and distress that any benefit that you might have had by taking the screen time away has been cancelled out by the damage to the relationship for a start, right? The damage to the relationship, the impingement on the autonomy, and then the, you know, that cascade, the downward spiral, that then now you have to recover. The relationship has to recover from your having limited the screen time. So from that perspective, I'd never suggest limiting screen time for PDA. Obviously, if you're dealing with a 3-year-old, you know, I don't know why 3-year-olds are getting significant screen time anyway, honestly. But once a child is autonomously using screens, and as I say, this is a very big topic, so we're just touching on it here. What we want is we want mastery over their screen time use, and that's not going to come with somebody else running it for them. And if we focus back on the cards, this is why the cards are so useful. If you focus back on the cards, for example, one key has often been for parents. I say to them, okay, you say that your child is always in their screen and you never get to talk to them. Have you gone and sat and asked if you can watch with them, or asked if they can show you? How much do you know about what they're doing? How many conversations have you had about it? Because don't focus on trying to take the screen away. Focus on the fact that the relationship need is not being met now because of the screens. Take the relationship into the screen space, and things will start to shift, start to transform. So that's often the key that turns things around. Because often, especially for PDA, you'll find they're hiding in the screen because everything else is too overwhelming. There's not enough safety, not enough relatedness, not enough competence. And all of those needs can actually be met through a screen if your real life isn't giving you a sense of relatedness, you can identify with certain role models or niche groups, and you get a sort of a virtual sense of relatedness through even just what you're watching on YouTube. If your sense of competence is really struggling, you can play a computer game that you can master and you can win and you can level up and you're feeling much better about your competence, right? Autonomy, I'm in charge of it and I choose what I watch. And I can click and I can stop and I can pause and I can fast forward, right? These give really easy wins for the cards, but they're fairly low level of nourishment of those cards. There's much higher levels of nourishment to be had from many other ways of meeting those needs. So as a parent, rather than taking the screen away, it's kind of like ripping somebody's crutch away when they're trying to walk, right? Then rather focus on meeting those other needs more effectively. And then the screens can move into a positive place, because in our era, there's an enormous amount of educational content there. I want to touch quickly because we're nearly out of time for this particular call. So I want to quickly touch on the question of the older kids and the IEB and the GED and all of this. This is also where self-directed education can be hugely useful in terms of taking away that parental panic. What if my child doesn't get a school leaving certificate? Because in SDE, we see a wide range of realities. The mainstream has this myth that you have to do grade 1, grade 2, grade 10, 11, 12, and then you have to do university, and then and then you get a job. And this isn't really examined in real life. Whereas what we see in the SDE community, and we've got like 100 years around the globe now to look at, it's not huge, it's niche, but it's enough that we're getting a picture, is that those kids who do want to go to university or do need to go to university for what they specifically want to do, when they're properly supported in an SDE way, will do it no matter what. It might just be a question of when. They might not do it at 18, they might do it at 22 or whatever, but they will get there and they will do it and they will be fine. Many kids in SDE don't go that route and they're absolutely fine. I'll give you one quick example. In fact, maybe I'll send you a video link to his interview. So I'll give you a super quick example. One of our graduates from Riverstone Village, when he had his qualitative assessment through Riverstone's diploma process, he was told that he had already mastered through play. He had already mastered everything he needed for, I forget what the NQF thingies are, but basically a tertiary level training in IT. You know, he could go and have an IT profession just from having played in a self-directed way and having all this. Obviously, he had all of the optimized self-directed education support because he was with us at Riverstone. But he didn't then need to go and pay the money. He could have gone and just converted to the certificate. You'll see in the interview why he didn't, because he did something next, because he'd already been there and done that. So the myth that you have to go a formal route, paying for courses and completing the courses and doing the assessments, and that's the only way you're going to get a good job, only really applies to a very tiny, narrow band of professions such as medicine and law. And the kids who are going to do medicine and law, and there are kids who come out of SDE who do medicine and law, they will do their IEB or their GED or whatever it is that they need to do in order to get where they need to go. But they don't have to do it in a continuous way from the age of 6 or 10 or 12 or 14 or 16 or 18, because you can catch that entry requirement up at any point in your life that you have the motivation and the support to catch up that entry level requirement because you're ready. And that's what we see in SDE that can again give the parents the big, oh, thank heaven. You know, it's not terminal that my child hasn't got this by the age of 18. Not at all. Not even slightly, right? So I would be hesitant about worrying too much about an IEB or a GED unless your child is gunning for it. I watched a PDA do serious Cambridge studies because it was completely on his time, in his readiness, under his control. And I mean, that kid's discipline schedule that he set up, it reminds me, if you've ever read Harry Thompson's memoir, PDA Paradox, he booked himself into military school. No, not military school. He actually joined the military for a while, right? So there is that capacity to engage with these environments when it's time, or when there's a readiness, or when there's a need. I wouldn't be worrying about trying to get her to do it. She'll be worrying about doing it because she thinks she has to, because her particular world is telling her that, because of her social setting, and her parents believing that is what's going to put the pressure on. Once her parents take the pressure off, and they also expose her to a wider range of possibilities for success in the world that maybe have more to do with her personal interests. I don't know, like, if we were in a one-on-one session here, I'd be asking you, what is she good at? What does she love? Because that might take her directly into some kind of career without her needing any high school kind of qualification. Okay. I see we've got more discussion on screens going on. I'm just going to leave that there in the chat. We've got about 10 minutes left, so we've sort of got time for a last question or so, and then we'll have a quick check out, perhaps. Let me tell you briefly. If you, that's what I do need to do. I really do need to do that. I need to quickly tell you what else I've got that you can use if you want to. So if you just want to get a bit more of that kind of mind shift and help yourself relax a little bit, get a bit more insight into sort of how SDE works, I've got 2 mini courses that are pre-recorded. They're on a PDF. You download the PDF, and then it's got all the video links, and it's got some extra resources like readings and podcasts and things like that that you can listen to. And it's also got self-reflection questions that you can do. And those self-reflection questions also make great discussion questions. So you can get a couple of colleagues together, watch a video, have a discussion. Everything you need will be there on that PDF for you to do that, or with your partner or your couple of extended family members who are all concerned with your PDA, or a couple of the support staff at your PDA area's place of education. You can use those resources to do that. There's 2 of them. The first one's called When School's Not Cool, What Are the Options? And then the second one is the 8 ahas that make SDE make sense. So you start with When School's Not Cool, and then if you want to go a bit deeper and further, then you do the second one. If you really want the live experience, we're starting the next cohort of Helping the Butterfly Hatch. If you know the story on the internet, that's where it comes from, but that's basically the self-directed education facilitators course. And that would be, I'll tell you in a second there, Faye, how to access all of that. The HTBH, Helping the Butterfly Hatch course, is going to start on the 9th of March, and that runs until mid-November. That's an 8-month course. For those who want to do certification, there's an extra month to do your documentation and assessment process and things like that. But that is really for parents who are feeling that they're going to unschool now. And it's for people who are going to look at maybe founding an alternative because there isn't an SDE setting available to your child, or those that are there don't want to do the necessary work to accommodate PDA, for example. Other people who've used these courses with me would be, there's au pairs who specialize, for example, and tutors who specialize in supporting PDA kids in a home-based setting. And then, some people just do this as a career move because there's a desperate need for people who understand SDE and PDA in the world. At settings, in homes, in helping professions, and then of course helping professionals. I've had an OT before, I've got a psychiatrist right now, I've had a remedial reading teacher, And it's really great for those people to just, you know, really, really grasp how to facilitate SDE together with their specialist intervention that they're able to offer. So all of those are available on my Patreon page, which I'll just give you the link for. For the PDFs, you just buy the PDF. You just pay and you download. If you can't afford it, talk to me, because especially for South African currency and just for anybody, this is my livelihood, and this is what pays for my own family's therapeutic and the sustenance needs. But I will never turn away somebody who's going to benefit, even one PDA. I will never turn you away. So talk to me if you need to. You can also sign up for, if you're interested in HTBH, it actually makes more sense if you're free to come on tomorrow night's call. Tomorrow night's call is the final call to just Q&A and support people who are interested in doing that course to decide if they're going to take that on, if they're ready for it or not. Okay, other questions? All right, just still more chatting about the screen time, which is good. Okay, so that's the other thing to just say about my options. There's also, I also have a Discord server. I don't know if you know Discord, but it's a platform actually originally created for teens and young adults for gaming, to interact around their games. But it's an amazing platform for kind of forum interaction. And you can also have live calls there, and you can have live calls without me. For example, if Sylvie and Belinda happened to be online at the same time, they could see each other there and they could have a quick chat, for example. And in that server, I also have a completely private space for PDA parents, for example, where you have got your own forum that the general SDE facilitators can't enter. And there's other subgroups there as well. So you can actually create as many sort of private rooms, private lounges as you like, but then you can also still access the common space. So that is also available on its own as a subscription, but it usually makes the most sense to do that together with some other kind of input, so that you're also, you know, engaging with the other people there around whatever content that you're going through. Okay, and then helping professionals. Okay, how do you get info about tomorrow's call? I'll just send out I'll just send out a link with this recording, I think, to the same group. So if you're watching this recording, you'll also get a link that you can join tomorrow's call if you'd like to. One-on-ones I don't do a lot of, simply because my time is extremely premium. I don't have a lot of it to give. So I prefer to do groups, because then everybody gets the benefit. I benefit more people with that chunk of time than a one-on-one. And also because there's so much richness in being in a group, because everybody learns from everybody else's experiences and wisdoms and insights and examples. And there's so many ahas. And I can't take everything from this call and translate it to this one-on-one call. So I prefer to do groups. I occasionally do one-on-ones when it's really necessary and there's really a reason for it. But then we have to schedule that in. And I also can't be negotiable on the rates for those. So great. I'm so glad that this has been helpful to you. Okay, fantastic. Lovely. So I will send you all the link, and we're pretty much out of time. So I think let's just stop the recording now, and we'll have a chance for a very quick checkout from anybody who wants to check out in person. And if you've been watching the recording, thank you very, very much. And I hope it's also been beneficial and helpful. And I would love to see you in our Shift community, is what it's called. And I'll send you all the details you need to be able to join.